guys, welcome to Partially Impartial. This show I really want to focus on the impartial part because, just given all the divisive issues that we've been going on lately, I kind of want to really show all sides and stay as unbiased as we can for this show. And this show will mostly focus on the racial and police brutality topics that have been so prevalent right now, and also what effect we think the coronavirus will have on all the protests, and all the economic crisis that we find ourselves in. How is all these protests and civil unrest going to affect that? So that being said, CJ it looks like he's recovering pretty well from his surgery, so he's back on the show, as well as our returning guest Sheldon. So I'm glad to be doing another episode with both you guys.
Yeah, man, it's good to be back. I'm glad that you guys were able to hold down the fort for a few episodes without me. Take care of business.
Yeah, glad to have you back, CJ, and it's good to be on here. So, love joining you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's going to be a real interesting show. Definitely no lack of news right now. So
yeah,
we'll go ahead and start off with the coronavirus stuff because we mostly want to focus on the George Floyd stuff. So we'll just get this out of the way. Just a quick update on the numbers. And there's really not a whole lot of interesting things going on here right now. We're coming up on 6.5 million confirmed cases globally and 387,000 confirmed deaths. The number of closed cases here, the recovered versus deaths, still over 10% on that. So we've had 3.1 million recoveries and 387,000 deaths. So that's still fairly high. We're probably gonna see that number dip down, and I bet it'll end somewhere around 5%, which is pretty crazy given the fact that all we hear is the death rate's probably around 1% or less than 1%. So looking at these charts here, the daily new cases worldwide, it flattened out there for a month or so. And then now we're actually on the uphill with global cases, at least, which is pretty interesting. It's definitely hitting a lot of other areas that it took a little bit longer to get to. And that probably has a little bit to do with just the seasonality of these type of respiratory viruses in general. Daily deaths is holding pretty flat worldwide. We're kind of sitting around 5,000 confirmed deaths through the globe. USA, we're still seeing over 20,000 cases a day for most days and around 1,000 deaths per day for most days. And obviously Brazil is still, they're actually getting the most cases every day now and the most deaths. And they're definitely the biggest contributor to the global cases we're seeing. And looks like Italy's made a pretty big recovery. Spain here, they're only showing like one or a handful of deaths every day. Really, I haven't heard too much about that. I don't know if they're actually fully through this or if they're having reporting issues, or that's something I got to look into a little more. The UK, they're still having a pretty rough time with this. I know they were a little bit behind the rest of Europe, Italy, and Spain. So I'm not sure if that number is going to just kind of stay up around 350 deaths per day in UK, or if they're going to start making a recovery like Spain and Italy. Also, India, it doesn't seem to really be exploding there, which it definitely has the potential to do that, given the fact that they have 1.3 billion people. And also, of course, they've done only 2,900 deaths per 1 million, which is very, very little. Here in the U.S., we've done 50,000 deaths per 1 million. So more than 10 times tests per capita in the U.S. than we've done in India. So looking at that, I would say it's very likely that they're missing a lot of their cases and probably a lot of their deaths as well. Mexico starting to get hit pretty hard as well. They had
interesting.
Yeah, and it's it's pretty warm there, and I know they were pretty relaxed and resistant to closing things down, so they probably just got hit with that sneak attack. They've also done a really low amount of tests per capita. Was there anything you guys wanted to add to that before we jump over to the George Floyd stuff?
Not really, other than the fact that, probably the reason why we don't have a whole lot of reporting from Mexico is they don't really have the capacity to do what we're able to do here in the U.S. I mean, or even in other countries like I don't know, Mexico. I don't know. I just don't think that they have the capacity to do that. I also find it interesting when the people compare like the spread of the virus to heat. Like I don't think that heat has to do much with the virus at all because the fact that um, a lot of living organisms like thrive in warmer climates. So especially the fact that there's more life in an Amazon jungle than there is in a desert, and it's or like in the cold. So sorry, not the desert, but yeah, the cold and freezing tundras. And so I don't know. I always thought it was kind of interesting when people are comparing, like, oh, there should be less, cases, or the virus should go away when it gets warmer. And it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense because heat creates life more than it destroys it. Honestly.
Well, I know each virus has a particular heat or temperature and humidity that it likes. To me, it seems
Hmm.
like that would be a pretty easy problem to figure out for scientists. Just get a bunch of batches of the virus, put it in hot or humid or cold or dry, and just test that. You think within a matter of a day or two, you could get some pretty conclusive results on whether temperature and climate is going to play a big factor in this. But it's still something I haven't really seen anything very conclusive on. It does seem, as it's approaching summer here in the US, that the virus is easing up a little. I mean, we have opened things up quite a bit now, and we haven't really seen a huge surge. So, it's just one of those things that's just totally up in the air. But I know for a lot of viruses, it does matter temperature and humidity.
I'm actually just as I'm going over numbers right now. I One of the things that I've been noticing and that I've kind of kept track of is this sudden kind of like switch from the majority of cases being found in the northern hemisphere, and now there's this switch going on as we do hit the warmer temperatures. We're starting to see a lot more cases down in South America, a lot more cases in India, a lot more cases in even in Africa and whatnot. So it's interesting that you bring up the whole temperature concept, because I don't think it has absolutely anything to do with the way that this virus replicates, or that it can its infectivity basically. Like, if it's warm, and all these countries and places like Brazil's getting hit, Peru, Chile, those are all big, countries that are having some issues. Saudi
South
Arabia,
Africa.
yeah, South Africa, and then you have just random, places like Pakistan, just, and then when you go South America, yeah, you got, Peru, Ecuador. They're starting to make their way up. They're not actually slowing down. So it's kind of interesting to see how before we had all these majority of these cases that were popping up in Europe, and it was like Spain, Italy, a lot in China, and obviously we don't know what the hell China's talking about, or whether their numbers are anywhere near real, since they had no cases and no deaths and nothing's happening there. But anyways, I just find it interesting that there's this, as the climate is changing, there has been this kind of switch in more uh, countries are more vulnerable, I guess.
Yeah, so probably if heat isn't playing a role like you guys are saying, then probably the one. Well, I see two different possibilities here. First and foremost, we have taken some pretty extreme precautions in the U.S., and I think we need to give a lot of credit to the steps that we have taken as far as masks and as far as closing down huge gatherings. I keep hearing a lot of people saying that there was absolutely no reason to close down the economy, and it was completely overblown because only 100,000 people died. But I think that really misses the point of giving credit to all of the things that we have done. So honestly, you cannot compare this virus to any virus in our past, basically, especially not any flu, because we don't shut down the economy during those. So even if a flu did kill 100,000 people, which I think it doesn't kill anywhere near that, um, it, you know, this could, I think it's reasonable to say that this would have killed over 1 million people in the US if we didn't shut things down. Also, I wanted to bring up one point here. Sweden, they are getting hit fairly hard still. They're renowned as the country that didn't shut down. Although I did hear that even though they didn't shut down, their economy has still been hit very hard. So the fact of not shutting down didn't really make too big of a difference. They saw 75 people die, and they only have 10 million. So their deaths per 1 million is 450, and ours in the US is 330. So they're still quite a bit ahead of us in deaths per 1 million. But let's go ahead and shift this over to how we think the virus is going to affect the protests in general, because this is just unprecedented amounts of people that are all going to meet up in the streets. They're doing chanting, which we know the virus spreads mostly through breathing, and when you're chanting, you're exhaling a ton of whatever's in your mouth. How big? How big? I'll let either one of you guys answer this. How much do you think that this is going to have an effect on it? I know it is outside, so it seems like there may be some things that kind of slow it down. But how big of impact do you guys think this is going to have on the spread?
I mean, I personally think it's going to be huge. It's going to be one of these things that, I mean, you have an entire country that's been shut down for, well, we'll say 2 months now, where people were quarantined and kept inside, whereas now you have this massed shift of, all of these people marching together in the streets. And I mean, it's, for the right reasons, in the sense that, they're standing up to police brutality and they're trying to, get their message across, but then they're also, in a sense, putting every single person that's there at risk. I mean, we're coming from a virus that, could show absolutely zero, signs of you having it. And, you could walk out the next day, interact with 30 other people, and, give those 30 other people a chance of being infected. So when you're bringing thousands and thousands of people together on the streets together, and I mean, we're talking, thousands of people that are passing out water, that are just water bottles to each person. So that means each person's just grabbing a water bottle. What happens if that person that's passing out water bottles is sick? I mean, it's just, and I mean, majority of the places that I've seen, we have seen a lot of masks and whatnot, but, and, in the, with the way that the virus is contracted and everything, like you were saying, a lot of the breathing in and breathing out and just screaming, I mean, a cloth mask isn't going to protect you. And I mean, a lot of these people also are, just using the wrong type of masks. They're barely covering their face. They have their shirts covering their faces just because it's, more about not being seen on camera rather than it's about being, protected from, a pandemic that's still very much alive. And in a sense, we're putting all these people together. They're all marching for, a united reason, but in return, it's going to, result in this huge spike. And I mean, I'm guessing in the next 30 days, which is kind of when I had expected for us to have another, reevaluation and shut down and try to figure stuff out again. But within the next 30 days, I'm expecting to see a large jump in cases, especially in the United States.
I agree. We got 14 days to see what happens from everybody that's been hanging out at the protests. So,
yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. You got 14 days, and they're still protesting. Yeah,
right.
They're still going out. They're still gathering. They're still doing everything. This is not something that's stopping overnight. This has been going on for, a week now, and each day gets bigger and bigger. And you have a lot of unity and a lot of good things that are coming out of it. But then again, you also have this, this social gathering and this coming together that shouldn't be happening, because there is zero social distancing going on. You are butts to nuts when it comes down to being at one of these protests, and if you're coughing on the person next to you, and the person's coughing behind you, they're coughing on you too. And it's just, it's a viral paradise when it comes down to one of these protests.
I watched a short clip comparing these protests and the virus in general to the Spanish flu, which has been tons of comparisons to that. And one of the big things that happened during the Spanish flu was once they kind of thought it was over for the first wave, a certain city, I can't remember which one, they allowed this parade to come through. And the pictures just show thousands and thousands of people stacked shoulder to shoulder. I believe I saw some masks in the crowd. It was a really blurry picture, but and because of that parade, it amplified the spread and ended up killing thousands and thousands of more people than it would have otherwise. So this is probably, short of a miracle and short of some other thing that comes in and saves us, this is probably going to cause a spike. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there's protests going on all across the world, which is just really crazy.
Yeah, that's been wild.
Yeah,
My mom was showing me a video of New Zealand where it was a peaceful protest, but thousands of people marching down the streets in New Zealand, and they were, um, chanting Black Lives Matter and things of that nature. And they did like the haka and stuff like that for Black Lives Matter. If you know what the haka is, it's basically um, a dance that's that's specific to their culture. So I don't know, it was really interesting, but I've seen stuff and all over the world, and it's just kind of wild to see it. But I didn't think that it was going to be a worldwide wildfire. I don't think I've seen anything violent in other countries, but it's been interesting.
Another thing too, just on top of the subject of this, just the mass protests and the impact that it could have on the spread of the virus is, a majority of these people are African American or people of color, and unfortunately, when it comes down to the coronavirus, they're a lot more susceptible of contracting the virus, and it's a lot more susceptible of even just affecting them worse, which it's just horrible when you think about it, just because everybody's gathering together and it's all for the right reasons. It's all against police brutality, and it's against, standing up for, basic rights of protesting. But then you're putting everybody that's susceptible at risk.
So let me go ahead and throw this theory out here, and I'll see what you guys think about it, or any other tangents you could go off of it. So let's say maybe you're China, and you kind of want the virus to spread further throughout the rest of the world, especially since they seem to have somewhat of a handle on it, or some other sketchy government or group, and let's say maybe you kind of hijack this social media that's trying to put together all these protests, and maybe there's some sort of an ill intent from somebody that it's almost they're trying to spread the virus or trying to create more civil unrest. Do you think something like that is possible? Do you think there's possibly some sort of ill intent behind getting all these people together?
You trying to jump into conspiracy theories here, Jarek?
Of course.
When it comes to civil unrest, yes, absolutely. And I don't know if they're coming from other countries, but there's definitely, and they've even shown it just, on the news from people that have been arrested that have came from different states that have just tried to invoke violence just in certain states and certain cities where there was going to be protests, but they weren't going to be violent enough to where they would seem like they were, being listened to. So they've caravaned people kind of across. I feel like it's more of an internal cost of civil unrest. I mean, I've heard reports of, police unloading bricks and stuff like that. That I don't necessarily believe, just because out of all of this, I have yet to see one report of bricks being thrown and like bricks actually like laying in the streets. Every time they show pictures, there's never bricks in the streets. There's rocks, there's bottles, there's electric scooters, whatever they could throw at the cops at the time, but there's never really any bricks. And I don't see that the police force is trying to incite any more violence or unrest, but I do believe that there are internal groups within the United States that are kind of traveling from spot to spot, trying to incite this violence for sure. Maybe not the spread of the virus, but definitely the spread of the violence.
Anarchy.
Yes.
And I don't even know if it's necessarily the virus that is um, the thing to be afraid of right now, honestly. I think that it's literally just something that's built up the aggression and anger that we're seeing right now, um, being let out in these riots, people being controlled, um, and then now people of color dying and unjustly and things like that. Like it's I don't know. Honestly, it's kind of leading me to believe that I think that there's a larger something larger at play, trying to end the America that we know, and it's been slowly going that direction since the beginning of the quarantine. We're all hoping that things are going to go back to normal, and I'm like, the more every day that goes by with these protests getting worse and nothing ever calming down, the more I'm worried that things may never be able to go back to the way they were.
Could you imagine
In
them
in the
trying to do a lockdown right now, just saying, you know what,
Oh
hey,
my
bam,
gosh,
we're back to red. You guys need to stay
I
home.
can't imagine them trying to do a lockdown in a month from now, 2 months from now. If there was to be another lockdown, I mean, people haven't been obeying the curfews still. you know, um, and there's been some wild things and picture videos of things going down with even the curfew. I don't know if you guys saw the video of the people inside their houses in Minnesota as military police are walking down the streets and they come outside on their porch, and a couple of the officers shout, get back inside," and then they like, I can't tell if they shot at the house or shot in the air, but you see flashing from the gun and gunshots. No, the person taking the video and those that were around this individual weren't hurt, but it's wild. Um, I saw reports today, and confirmed by I can't remember what news source, but it was a fairly reliable one. I don't know which news source is really reliable anymore these days. But anyways, I digress. That there was a police that basically destroyed a medical aid spot over at a riot, started smashing water bottles and flipping over tables that had medical supplies, where basically nurses and other medical professionals had been leaving the hospitals to go and volunteer and help over at some of the riots. On top of that, kind of what we talked about before, um, the podcast too, of the guy that was running the restaurant that died. Like, the police, or the truck driver that drove through the protesters on the freeway. Like, there's all these things just like continuing to like build up and build up and build up, and like the divide that's happening in our country is getting wider and wider and wider, and it's just wild, just wild.
It's strange too.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of casualties on all sides of this. I
Yeah.
barely watched like a 5 minute video about all of the news media people that have all gotten caught with rubber bullets and with pepper bullets and mace and pepper spray, and they've been thrown to the ground. And I've seen the videos of it. A lot of them are pretty
Say that again, CJ.
What was that?
There was a CNN reporter that actually got arrested.
Yeah, I watched
Oh
that
yeah,
video.
that was
Yep.
yeah, that was early on. That didn't make any sense, but I've definitely seen a good amount of violence on them, and then I've seen obviously, I mean, both just and unjust violence on the protesters themselves. I mean, sometimes there's absolutely no violence going on, but the cops are just done having them there, and they just start firing off whatever they got, and and they just get them out of there, and then I also just barely saw a list of casualties and injuries that the police force has had.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
was
really
actually just
just
about to bring that up too.
yeah, it's just tragic on all ends. But I do I want to since you were actually there. So we're here in Salt Lake City, and there's been it's been fairly quiet, but there was one day where things actually got pretty real, and CJ was actually there on the spot. So do you want to tell us what you saw, CJ?
Yeah, I mean, I had actually went down there, just to be part of the support, but then also knowing that I can come back on the podcast and kind of report firsthand what was going down. So went downtown, and it was actually relatively hard to find. I actually had to look on Snapchat of all things, and just tried to find where all the stories were, and then kind of found where everybody was congregated. And as we were walking up, pretty peaceful. A lot of people in their cars, which was a good thing to see, that people were social distancing and whatnot, and just a lot of signs and people hanging out of their cars and honking "Justice for Floyd" and Black Lives Matter, and a lot of good positive stuff, and a lot of good bringing together. And then as things were going on, it was kind of like things started getting really enticed in a corner, and I was with my girlfriend, and we ran across the street to kind of go see what was going on, and had seen that they had flipped a police car over. And it's really ironic that it's the only police car that got flipped over in all of Salt Lake City, but I was the one that happened to be right there as it was happening. And there's a bunch of people jumping up and down around it. There was a lady actually taking a shit on top of it. Um, People were
Oh, so
spray
you saw
painting
that
it.
firsthand? I thought she was peeing
Oh,
on
I
the
was.
same thing.
I was up front. It's like I was get. I have video of it. I shared some of it on Facebook. I'll have to share it your way. But anyways, I saw all the people, spray painting on the car and whatnot, and it really was a select group that. Most people were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, back up! Like, we don't need to do this. This isn't what this is about." And even people on their megaphones were screaming, "Hey, this is supposed to be a peaceful protest." And I found it quite ironic that that's where the news cameras were too. Is the news cameras were right there as like where things were getting violent, whereas around it there was a lot of congregating and a lot of people that were peacefully protesting. And as things got on, I feel like maybe those people that were trying to entice more rioting of that sort. That's when they were getting pissed and actually started, lighting shirts on fire and throwing them inside. And my biggest concern, just as I was kind of trying to keep my distance, but also wanting to get a good shot, was, I didn't know if there was shotgun bullets in that police car. As it started going up in flames. I mean, that it definitely exploded a few times and definitely heard a few shots. But then on top of that, you had people throwing fireworks in the middle of it, so that way they'd explode, and everybody would run. So it's like it was almost like there was these people trying to entice this fear and trying to cause these problems. But as that kind of started to die down, that's when people proceeded to march towards the Capitol. And as we were marching towards the Capitol there off of I believe we were off of, or yeah, we were off of State Street, or and as we were walking up towards the Capitol, there's a Salt Lake Court building right there, and uh, it's completely empty, like completely clean. Nothing was blocked off. I have to mention as well that there was not a single police officer anywhere. There was not a single police officer in riot gear. There was a security guard. There wasn't a single security, like a cop. Nothing blocked off. Nothing. Like And as we proceeded to walk past the courthouse, and was almost surprised, like, hey, nobody's done anything to the Salt Lake courthouse, or it was like the municipal one, I don't know, the smaller one, but anyways. And as we were walking by, people started chucking rocks at it and smashing the windows, and there was a lot of people doing the same thing, like as they were walking by. Hey, what the hell are you guys doing? This is a peaceful protest. We're here for the right reasons. We're not here to cause damage. And as people kept walking towards the Capitol, that's as we started to kind of head back towards our car. And then kind of glad that we did, because once we did head back to the car, as we got home, that's when we turned on the news, and that's when the guy with the bow and arrow was out there, and they had flipped his car and got his car on fire. And then it was almost like a light switch. Like we had gotten home, and even on the way home, I had seen SWAT, 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 cop car, cop car, cop car, all heading downtown. So it was almost like all at once they flicked a switch and said, all right, we're done with this. We're gonna start containing it. But real wasn't impressed in the sense that they weren't expecting it, and they were very unprepared. And if they would have had some sort of presence there, they could have kept some sort of rest. And as long as they kept it all civil, there wasn't any no enticed violence, no attacking of protesters, then I think they could have kept things peaceful, just like how they have the last 2 or 3 nights now. But it was very interesting to be there firsthand. I felt that cop car heat explode as it was going down, and I mean, definitely a real situation. You have people walking around with ARs that I later found out that person that was in my video is a white supremacist that was there, that was actually there to entice violence. Like, I mean, that's why I tried to record as much as I could. And I mean, I wasn't. That's why I say I hope none of my videos got anybody arrested per se, but it was mostly I really wanted to document the different types of people that were there, because it was, you did have families there, you did have immigrants there that were there to stand up for police violence, and you did have black people there that were for police violence. You had white people there that were for the same reason, but then you also had that select few black people, the select few Mexicans, the select few white people that were all, fed up with the system, or fed up with what was going on with, the government in general, and have used this as an open door to, kind of prop open, like, okay, hey, everybody else is pissed off. We're really pissed off, so we're going to show you, and we're going to hurt you while you're already hurting.
Right. That's kind of one of the things I was talking about. A lot of people have used this as kind of a soapbox to stand on top of for whatever else they're upset about. Like, it's not about. It started about race. It's not about race anymore. It's about power. It's about being upset about whatever it is that you're upset about with the government, and using I think the people that are being violent are using this platform to under the guise of Black Lives Matter to just can't yeah exactly complete anarchy. And it's the scary thing about it to watch. Like, the things that I'm seeing on TV that are or on Facebook and whatever that are blowing me away is scary, because I don't know if you got to the part in that podcast, Jarek, but in the It Could Happen Here podcast, the first couple things that he talks about how the civil unrest starts before the possibility of a civil war happening in the U.S. is just it's it's almost surreal to be watching it, and I had to have listened to this podcast 6 months ago and see what I was listening to almost happen right before my eyes in a way.
So, can you explain? I haven't listened to that yet, but it does definitely seem like there is a lot of that clashing going on right now. Can you explain what his opinion is on the podcast of how and why this could potentially lead to a civil war? Because that seems like a really huge
Yeah.
thing, you know.
So, I mean, in the podcast, it's interesting. He kind of he leans more left and is believes that the war would actually be started by right wing um, radicalists and not left wing because it's I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's like maybe right wing people are under the guise of left wing stuff creating all this violence. I don't know, but um, basically his opinion on it, just kind of talking about um, just I don't know. It's been a while since I've listened to it, honestly, so I don't know if I can give his exact opinion. But he talks about the just kind of the recipe for disaster that has been seen in places like Syria, Lebanon, other things that led up to like the civil war that we had originally in the U.S. back in the 1800s. Some of the things that led up to that. He maybe what would be best is I can look up and listen to the podcast again for a little bit and kind of find the episode that really kind of digs into some of that stuff, and maybe we could post a link in the description of our pod of this episode's podcast for people to go find that and listen to it so that they can hear it a little bit and start following that podcast so that I think it's really important for people to listen to it right now because it's something that you can see, um, like listen to and kind of see the recipe that's happening right now of people rising up and being angry about the system in whatever way that they're upset about it, and just like we were saying, creating anarchy, wanting to overthrow the current system that we have. I've seen people utilizing, things said in the Declaration of Independence of, when your government becomes tyrannical, that it's up to the people to rise up and remove that government, and it's oof, it's scary.
Yeah, if you find that one, send it to me, and maybe we'll both listen to it, and then we can dig into that topic a little bit more on one of the next shows. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that might be
okay,
best.
yeah, this definitely all reminds me of the fourth turning, and I'm so glad I looked into that theory and read
Yeah,
Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning, because it really lets you just zoom out on this whole thing and kind of realize that okay, it's not society's not necessarily going to shit. It's not like we're progressing into this deep dark hole right now. That we're going. How Neil Howe would say it is we're in the winter of society, and what happens
yeah,
through winter is everything dies off. All the things that aren't strong enough, they don't make it through winter, and then and spring comes, and then there's all this new growth. And there's just been a whole basically every human alive right now has not lived through a genuine crisis on the level of World War II or the Great Depression. And I think that's a really, really important thing for shaping people's perspective, because I mean, society, it's not like this continuous memory that exists in society. People only live for about 90 years. So every 90 years or so, society has still progressed in a way, but it's with entirely new people that have basically not firsthand experienced all of the lessons learned from the past. So that's the biggest driver between why we almost have to go through these crisis periods, because so many institutions just push the limit, and we're pushing our financial system to the limit, and we're pushing divisiveness and political issues to the limit. And we're kind of have this attitude that we can just keep pushing, we can just keep printing money, we can just keep throwing out fake news, and it's just going to keep working the same. But there has to be a breaking point at some point. All of this money printing and all of this political tension has to come to some sort of conclusion. So I think, according to Neil Howe's theory, at least, this decade from 2020 to 2030 is going to be that really transformational and painful period where there's going to be some serious hard times that people actually learn lessons from and actually learn that we need community. And one of the most interesting aspects to a fourth turning, other than the fact that it does lead into a first turning, which is a period of growth and prosperity, during the fourth turning is actually the only time where wealth inequality reduces. So basically, through the first, second, and third turnings, it builds up slowly, slowly builds up slowly, and then it accelerates at the end. And that's actually what we're seeing right now is the acceleration of wealth inequality as we have 40 million jobs lost, but yet the stock market is still up there trying to hit new highs. And of course, the top 10% owns 84% of the stock market. So actually, the higher the stock market goes, the greater the wealth inequality is. So it always reaches this peak in the fourth turning, and then it all comes crashing down because there's this quote that says the greatest. I don't remember word for word, but basically it says that the greatest thing that ends empires is a disparity between the rich and the poor, and that just grows and grows and grows until something clashes on it, and that just no longer works. And then we realize during that crisis that society actually functions better when everybody's making some level of money. But I do want to talk a little bit about what's been going on with the stock market. But before we do that, one of the biggest issues I've been seeing kind of debated back and forth is the issue of like, was this really a race driven thing, or was this just like a misguided cop? So if both of you guys could tell me, like, when you watched the video at first, what was your initial reaction to it? Do you think that cop was full on racist? Was he a tiny bit racist, or do you think that race didn't play a role? It was just more of a power trip.
I think honestly, I don't know enough about the officer to know what his perception and ideals were around race. So I don't know if I could say yes, it was racially motivated. Was it a power move? Absolutely. You can tell that he is like just his body language, his facial expressions. He is in a position of power. He knows he's in a position of power, and you know that leads to the idea that it could have been and most likely is racially motivated. I would say I think personally the racial motivation behind it is probably like 90%, you know, um, and or maybe like 60%. The other 40 is power. Actually, that being that he's showing the power, but it's motivated by racial, um, you know, problems. I mean, and the cop had 18 other problems that were put up against him. I don't know what those other 18 were, but definitely could have been racial things that he would having problems with before this as well.
See, I'm seeing it more as definitely a power trip, and definitely did have some sort of racial uh, you know backlash, but I think it's more like a 40% racial, 40% power trip, and then also a 20% just the fear, because almost while you're watching the video, as heartbreaking as it is, as you're watching this person's life be taken away, you're also seeing the eyes of this cop that's doing it, and he just looks like he has no idea what the hell he is doing. And I think that's part of that is the problem right there is, you can't have a cop, or you can't have police that are motivated, by their rage, and then you can't have police that are, have to hold up to this expectation. I felt like he had those other police officers that were behind him, and he felt like if he got off, he was the one that was, taking it easy. So it was just all in or nothing, and that's what ended up fucking him in the end. And I mean, I like you said before, Sheldon, I don't know the guy, so I can't tell you if he's racist or not. I can definitely tell you that in looking in his eyes, that there was a huge power trip going on, as well as, like I said, there's that fear that all these people were watching him and all these people were recording him and all these people yelling at him. And I mean, as a human being, not trying to give him any benefit of the doubt, because I do not support him whatsoever, but as a human being, when if you're in a situation where your adrenaline's going and you have a bunch of people yelling at you and your mind's all over the place, you are not thinking straight. And I think when it comes down to something like that, we need police officers that can be in those situations and continue to think straight, not, go astray, flip out, and, result in the end of a life.
Right.
Yeah, so kind of the way I see it, I've heard a good amount of arguments to suggest that it wasn't like a fully racially motivated thing, and I would somewhat agree with that. I don't think the cop is a blatant racist. I mean, there was obviously no racial slurs being thrown out. There was nothing that would indicate some real underlying hatred. But I do think what's kind of interesting is I could see this being the scenario, and obviously we'll probably never really know the full scenario. But let's say let's say he was a white person in the exact same situation, and they get him on the ground, and he puts his knee on his neck, and maybe just because there's one little trace of racism with the black person. Maybe if he was a white person, he would have listened to him when he said he couldn't breathe, or just some little tiny thing like that. Maybe he would have moved his knee onto his back instead of his neck if it wasn't a black person. So I definitely don't think it was like a blatant racial assassination, but I do think that that sliver of racism could have potentially been the thing that made the difference between life and death in this situation. And I do think if that is the case, if it was a tiny bit of racism, then we've seen firsthand how that little bit can make all the difference. But I do want to say, when it comes to these protesters, I've been hearing quite a bit of statistics, and I don't necessarily think there is this really deep endemic issue of white cops killing black individuals. I do think there at least is this aspect where that story just kind of gets blown up when it does happen. So I'm really not 100% convinced that there is this real issue and that we're going to get out in the streets and protest it and it's going to make this huge difference. I do want to say, though, I think one issue that would really drastically impact this fact that it seems like African Americans are getting the raw end of the deal when it comes to the police and the justice system as a whole. I think this would be the perfect time to bring up the topic of the drug war and just how bad it's been and how it's created this unfair system. I personally think that we would actually be better off at least trying out basically legalizing all drugs to some degree and just ending the drug war.
I 100% agree with you. So I took a criminal justice class, just an intro to criminal justice in my first semester of college, and one of the sections that we studied was the drug war. And we watched this documentary on YouTube. I should probably try and find it. I can't remember where it is, but it basically shows how, unfortunately, the drug war and the war on drugs is 100% racially motivated. Um, so, first off, opium. Uh, Back in the 1800s, during the building of the railroad was significantly staffed and like being built by Chinese. And there were many people that were upset that they were taking jobs. And so, shortly after, opium, which was heavily used by the Chinese community, was made illegal. Opium just literally makes you relaxed and puts you into a state of, some people have hallucinations, some people just, it's like weed, smoking opium. And uh, therefore, because opium's illegal, then you have opioids that are now made only accessible through a doctor prescription. And I mean, the opioids in general is a problem, but like the just smoking opium was made illegal so that they could start jailing the Chinese. Next is weed. Weed was actually made illegal in the early 1900s as Mexicans and other Latino culture um, individuals started coming to America more. Again, taking jobs. Again, trying to find a way to not taking jobs, but people are thinking they're taking jobs. I don't want anybody to think that I'm
They took our jobs.
being racist here, okay? I'm just, yeah, I'm not. But basically, then they made weed illegal. Cocaine was made illegal in the 60s as a way to, uh, black the black community heavily used cocaine. It was found early in the like in the 1930s, 1940s, when Coke was first starting to come about. Coke was called Coke because it had cocaine in it, and that was made illegal because they wanted to, keep the find a way to put the black community away and keep them from stealing jobs in the business industry, quote unquote, stealing jobs. Uh, it's amazing to see if you really do the study back into the the drug war. Like it was first a war on race before it was a war on drugs, and now it's a war on drugs. And you see a specific group of people that are being targeted that have these drugs because they're the ones that had them in the beginning. And honestly, if, like you said, if we made all these things legal, I think it would make it so that I don't see a problem in government oversight with distributing narcotics to people and having limits to it, like having the same limits that you have around alcohol distribution around every other drug that anybody could get their hands on, and then throwing the money that we're spending on individuals that can't afford a lawyer in court to rehabilitation and rehabilitating people that are on these drugs, and allowing people to be able to use certain drugs for like getting out of bad places, like shrooms is actually currently being investigated and used for the possibility to treat PTSD. um, and ketamine, right? There's these hallucinogen drugs that if under the right trained eye and governance, like you could help people like actually get past things. There's so much that we can use that is from the earth naturally that we can use for the benefit of humanity that's being made illegal, and people are getting unnecessarily thrown into jail, overcrowding our jail system with minuscule crimes. Like, let's make it legal, let's distribute it in a way that is regulated, and get rid of the black market, get rid of the cartels, or at least significantly reduce the demand that the cartels would have by making these drugs legal to the public and putting our money into rehabilitation. There's a really good TED talk that somebody gives on how Portugal has actually gone about doing this. They have legalized drugs 110%, and they've put all their money into rehabilitation. And on top of that, they've given businesses grants for hiring and rehabilitating criminals that are coming out of the justice system and trying to help them rebuild their lives in a positive way. Because that's another problem that we have with our system, is that you get this background check of like, have you committed a felony, have you been to jail, and people that are trying to come out of jail and get back into society have a harder time building a positive lifestyle afterwards and getting back into life the way that the rest of us live it, and being judged because of what they did in the past, are having a hard time getting a job and moving forward because they're being judged so heavily. And so they go back into the system because it's easier to be in jail than it is to get a job, because nobody will give you a job because you have this record. And it's just a replicating system of destroying people's lives in multiple different ways. I could go on and on and on about it, obviously, but I'm just going to stop there. Um, there's a lot of problems with that.
So just imagining a world now where, well, let's say tomorrow we made the drugs legal, and started getting some sort of government oversight. Obviously, the government oversight would be a very, very tricky thing to be able to do right, to where you don't develop these corporations that get monopolies on these drugs and try and sell them to as many people as possible. It'd be a really difficult thing. But man, let's just look at all of the change. I don't even know if society could handle that type of change without going through some sort of implosion, because first of all, the prison system is built off of housing a large number of prisoners, and they make all this money, and they have these sort of quotas that they need to reach. So first of all, if you ended all the drug prohibition, that would get 50% of people out. And then think of how it would affect the police officers as well, because probably about 50% or 30% or so of what they do is going after drugs. So you would just have to like fire all them, or let them go. It would have these huge impacts. And then of course on the cartels and all of the underground black market for drugs, that would come collapsing down, and that part of it would probably be a good thing. But I guarantee that drug money has infiltrated our political system, and that's probably one of the main reasons why we've seen such a intensification of the drug war over the past decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, whatever it's been, is because drug money is most likely, would be my theory at least. I don't know if this
It's a
is most
fact.
likely being.
It's not a theory.
Go
Look,
ahead.
I'm going to butt in just really quick. Just go in and look
Yeah,
at how Al Qaeda started.
it's funded.
Boom. It's the U.S. military helping to funnel opium illegally through the Middle East, and then the U.S. turning on Al Qaeda. There you go.
Yeah.
Like drug
Yeah,
money
it's guaranteed, and
funneling
that's probably
into
why
the U.S.
we will
government.
never
Right there.
be able to see this drug war actually come to an end and all drugs legal. At least not until the fourth turning comes into it, has its way with us. But because it's so easy to paint drugs in a bad light, and there's so many religious people and people that are just trying to be good that would just absolutely not even be open to this idea any way, shape, or form. And the money coming into the government would be highly influential in, because you can't, the cartels, the last thing they want is for drugs to be legalized. They make way more money if this is illegal. So hopefully, as this fourth turning progresses through the next decade or so, because this is actually a huge issue. All of those things I just mentioned, and probably so much more, that is having such a massive impact on our society, because the drugs being illegal, that pretty much guarantees that there's always going to be money available for bad people. Because drugs are illegal, that means bad people always have a good way to make money. So this is having a massive, massive impact on our society right now. So hopefully that can be one of the good things that we can see as this fourth turning goes through. Maybe it just won't make sense to keep drugs illegal anymore as we go through some sort of crisis.
I just want to be able to grow my Girl Scout cookie OG in my backyard and not have to worry about the popo across the street. That's all I'm saying.
So yeah, let's actually just come to an end here. So all right, so sounds like we're having a bit of technical issues here. I'll just go ahead and edit that out. But we've been going for about an hour now. I didn't actually touch on a single one of these articles, but we got a whole bunch of good stuff in as usual. So it's been really great talking with you guys. I'm glad to have you on. I'm sure we'll definitely be following this closely. So we'll definitely have you on again, Sheldon. And yeah, stay tuned for the next show, guys.
Take it easy, guys. Stay safe.
Yep. Stay safe, everybody.
Yeah, the world's pretty crazy right now. Definitely stay safe, especially if you're a protester. Go out, do what you got to do, but stay safe. And also, go ahead,
Wear a mask.
give us a subscribe, like, or follow if you liked our stuff. But yeah, you'll definitely be hearing from us again.